Welcome to Labor on the Job. I'm the host, Steve Zeltzer. Tonight we're going to be looking at the crisis of the airline industry, how it's affecting the airlines and airline workers. We're also going to be looking at a representation fight, at who's going to represent United Airline Mechanics. So joining the show tonight are Steve MacFarlane. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you.
And you're?
I'm the National Director of the Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Association.
And what is the Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Association?
We're a labor union that represents mechanics and related in the aviation industry. We have 7 carriers that we represent.
Okay, and also joining us is Kurt Kadel. Welcome to the show, Kurt.
Thank you.
And you are?
I'm the Region 1 Coordinator, Airline Technical Division, basically the western part of the United States.
And how many mechanics do you represent in the western parts of the United States?
Okay, in the western part we represent about 4,000 mechanics.
Okay, from what airlines?
From United Airlines, Horizon Airlines, Southwest Airlines, and Alaska Airlines.
So that's a lot of mechanics.
Yes, it is.
Okay, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Douglas Butz. Welcome to the show, Douglas.
Thank you, Steve.
And you are?
I'm the AMFA National Treasurer, and I oversee the finances of the national organization.
I see. So welcome to the show. And also joining us is Michael Ayala. Welcome to the show.
Ayala.
Michael.
Thank you, Steve.
And what is your position?
I'm the AMFA National Safety and Standards Director.
I see. And that's a big issue in the airline industry these days.
Yes, it is. Safety and standards is one of the premier issues in the airline industry today.
Okay, and we did invite some representatives of the Teamsters Union. They weren't able to make it, but maybe in a future show they can come on and participate in this discussion. Well, Steve, why don't we talk first about where the airline industry is at this point. It was deregulated in the 70s by Carter, and there's been a tremendous crisis in the airline industry. What's the state of the airline industry today?
Well, you know, to put it mildly, it's really in chaos, at least from the standpoint of the workers. And I'm sure the passengers would agree with that as well. But because of all of the events that have happened in the last 5 years with 9/11, with the companies using SARS and the Iraq War as excuses to lay off workers and continue to really, what I believe, manipulate the laws. Bankruptcy, for example, has been used to completely reverse decades of advances that labor has made. And really, it's a very tough time to be a worker in the airline industry today. And like I said, even a passenger, the passengers can relate to this. It's in turmoil.
And Kurt, do you agree with that statement about the status of the airline industry?
Absolutely. It's an ever-evolving battlefield. The changes, the problems that we face from day to day are continuing to change. It's a revolution, if you will.
Well, let's talk about the bankruptcies, because it seems like there have been many, many bankruptcies. Airlines have gone bust, Eastern, Pan Am. What has been the effect of bankruptcies for airline workers in the United States?
Well, it's been a gutting of their contract. Like I said earlier, decades have been rolled back. And really, if the government had not allowed these carriers to use the bankruptcy, I think the market would have really corrected itself. U.S. Air, when they filed bankruptcy and was allowed actually to file again after they had gone through the first time, that really set unbalanced the beam to where the other carriers felt they had to file Chapter 11 too, just to remain competitive. And so you saw one after another begin to use the bankruptcy laws to do what they were unable to do at the bargaining table.
And what was the purpose of using these bankruptcy laws? I mean, you say they had a goal in mind. What was the goal?
Well, the goal, of course, was to finally, deregulation was intended to do a lot of things. One of them was to really bring wages down to what the carriers felt were a level that was more competitive. Airline jobs have typically been a pretty good living. A family could raise their family. You could send kids to college. It was an upper middle class income. And obviously the carriers don't like sharing any of their profits with anyone, and so they had to figure out a way to gut the contracts. And bankruptcy really became the silver bullet. They were unable to do any of this at the bargaining table because workers just simply weren't willing to do what the companies were asking them to do. It was unreasonable. But with the bankruptcy judge holding a gun to your head, you really had no choice.
Well, Michael, the issue of safety has been in the news. I mean, air traffic controllers saying there's more dangers of accidents, cutting back on air traffic controllers, outsourcing of repairs, and the lack of being able to inspect some of these planes that are being outsourced. Do you think that there's a crisis as far as safety because of this crisis in the airline industry?
Well, Steve, there's a lot of different issues that we're faced. It's really hard to pinpoint one specific issue. You could look at the outsourcing issue that we're faced with, and you go, okay, well, why are they allowed to send our equipment overseas? What purpose does it serve? I mean, and how does our FAA survey these aircraft that are overseas?
How do they?
And that's a good question. That's a very good question because, quite frankly, Steve, I don't know. See, because they have to announce themselves before they, let's say if they're in China, they just don't stroll onto the property like they would do here, for example, down at United. They could just come onto the property and stick their badge on and let management know, well, I'm here, and go survey. Well,
So they have unimpeded access to all
here in the
aircraft
States,
in the United
absolutely,
States?
yes.
So without question, if an inspector comes on, he has immediate access to the airline.
Yeah. Yes,
So
he
they
does.
can't stop him.
No, they can't.
But you're saying in other countries it's a different procedure.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you think about it. I mean, you go to China. I've traveled there. I don't know if you have, but and for the most part, when I was in Shanghai, yeah, you could go and move around freely. But you think about now we're talking about an aircraft, sitting in a hangar, and you're asking a foreign inspector to come into this country and just, well, come and inspect the airplane. It doesn't happen that easily. I mean, they let them in, obviously, but, to what degree or how do they have to announce their, arrival, and what is the process that they have to go through, Steve? I really, quite frankly, couldn't answer that. Because
Well, the whole issue of outsourcing, the idea of the virtual airline, which was a lot of these companies would like to have, the virtual airline where nobody works for the airline. Kurt, what is that all about?
Yeah, basically, this has been around for quite a while, this concept. At United Airlines, Stephen Wolf in 1989, I think, coined the phrase at the time. And basically, they just want to sell tickets. They need pilots, they need flight attendants, but everybody else, they're finding markets where that they can outsource. And now with this global economy, we can cross the borders here. So it's basically, they reap the revenue, and all they do is sell a seat.
And what does that mean to the workforce at an airline?
A workforce at an airline, it demeans you, and basically they don't need you as much right now. You're less needed.
So what about the legislation protecting safety and protecting airline workers so they have some protection? Is there any?
Well, that's a great question, and it really speaks to the unknown. Outsourcing, everybody just thinks about airplanes going overseas and being worked by what people assume are qualified technicians that have the same standards and have the same facilities. Nothing could be further from the truth. Some of these organizations are credible and they're capable and they do fairly good work. The problem, though, is what people don't know is that the companies have gone overseas not just because of the wages, but because they're able to completely circumvent OSHA, EPA, labor laws, all of the laws that we as a nation have created over the years to provide balance to the corporations so that they don't just completely destroy the planet in the interest of making a profit. And 15 years ago, we stopped painting airplanes in Minneapolis because the EPA would no longer allow us to do the things we had done, dumping all of these things into the waste stream. And so what happened was that it would begin to move south. They started doing them in Texas, where they were a little less stringent. Well, now you can't really paint airplanes in this country without having a very modern, very expensive facility. But if you fly it over to China, guess what? None of those laws exist, and now we're stripping airplanes with a stripper that was outlawed in this country years ago, and we're dumping all of this stuff into the planet. And guess what? It's all the same planet, folks. Just because we're not doing it here anymore doesn't mean a thing. The corporations are saving unbelievable amount of money and avoiding federal regulation by doing that.
And there's, of course, an environmental catastrophe going on in China with the cost of all these dirty plants and lack of regulation in China.
And that really speaks exactly to the point. That's why the corporations have gone over there. The airlines, this isn't something they weren't aware of. They're fully aware of it. It's part of the incentive to move jobs overseas.
But it doesn't seem like that's an issue in the debate in the United States about this whole transfer of jobs and transfer of skilled work that could be done in this country. We have skilled workers, we have people that can do the work, we have the technology, yet it's going someplace else.
Well, we can do all of those things. The problem, excuse me, the problem is that the corporations, in the ever lasting search for a profit, which profit isn't bad. Obviously, we want companies to be profitable. They need to be. But that needs to be balanced. This unbridled greed of just, taking and stripping everything away and just, doing whatever you have to do to remain competitive and to make a profit, no matter who you step on, no matter what laws you break, no matter what laws you manipulate. That's really where this has all gone, and the pendulum has swung so far to the corporation side. It's time that working men and women realize what's going on, and for not so much us, because there's a lot that's been lost, but for the next generation. That's who we need to be fighting for. And if you care anything about your children and your grandchildren, we have to get angry, we have to get determined, and we have to go out and make the government and the corporations be held accountable for what's happening.
Now, at United Airlines, we're going to be talking about what's going on as far as the representation struggle. There was a plan to put the workers in charge of United, the ESOP. What was that all about, and what was the result of that? Kurt?
Okay, yes. Back in 1994, we, as mechanics and also with the ramp personnel, service personnel at United, were covered under the IAM, and same situation that we just recently went through with the bankruptcies here. The company was talking about going in bankruptcy, talk to the unions and go, if you guys can come up with a better plan, we're willing to listen. So, and it's not the first time this has ever happened. They did it at Eastern Airlines, they did it in the 80s, an employee ownership program where you give up concessions over a contractual period, and all those savings there allow the company to stay out of bankruptcy and to do what they wanted to do. They did a lot of internal infrastructure. We got brand new plants. They painted everything. And, and we started making money. I remember about 3 years into it, they said, last quarter, United Airlines made more money than any other airline has ever made any time. So these were the great times right there. And in return, we got stock for this. And at one point, I think when we first got it, it was about $10,000. And the stock went and it split. And everybody that was in the mechanics class had over $100,000 on paper. Interesting enough, the problem with that ESOP was it had a termination date. And at the end of the termination date were our contracts. The pilots started what was famously called the Summer of Hell, and because they were coming in for contracts. And they got back all their gains and then some plus in that contract. Next up was ours, and we started going through our contractual period, and we got our gains back too. In the middle of all of this, the corporation says, well, we got to do something, and our value on our stock went from over $100,000 down to about $1,000. Okay.
And in order to join this, the union gave up
concessions, wage and work
What kind
rules.
of concessions were given up to get that, to put that in ESOP in place?
Okay, things that we had given up was we gave up wages. We also gave up a paid lunch. Help me out here. Guys.
Well, part of it was the outsourcing. The
Yes.
previous union had agreed to a 20% outsourcing, which they didn't regulate. They had no way of
Audit.
auditing it and figuring it out. And in the end, you find out that they're really outsourcing way more than that, but the contract didn't cover anything to verify
So
it.
there was no protection, or there was no real regulation or understanding of how outsourcing was going to affect your unit.
Right.
Correct.
And
They built it, they went from one to another. And just to go back to the foreign outsourcing, it strikes me as really odd that we have congressional hearings about paint and lead for toys and stuff like that. However, we're sending our aircraft there. United Airlines and these other companies are sending their work over there to get out of all the regulations and stuff that Steve spoke about. Well, that's exactly what Mattel did.
But doesn't the airline industry control the FAA and the federal government? Isn't that, I mean, it's like the fox is guarding the chicken? I mean, as far as what's really going on?
That's absolutely true. At most carriers, I certainly can speak to at Northwest, it was a very cozy relationship. You would work for Northwest for several years, you would retire from the carrier, and then go to work for the FAA. These people were friends, they were colleagues, they had a relationship for years. And that is part of the problem, is that when you're that close to the oversight is that close to the carrier, there's a lot of things that get overlooked, and there's a lot of things that you just simply aren't going to pursue in the interest of safety.
And that was an important strike. The workers at Northwest refused, the mechanics refused to take concessions. What happened, first of all, in that strike, and what were the lessons of that strike for your union?
Well, the strike lasted for 444 days. It was a very long, very difficult strike. Most people don't really, I believe, understand why we struck. I'm a Northwest mechanic, 25 years with the carrier. I'm currently on layoff after the strike. And really, the strike was about jobs. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about concessions. We were willing to do the things that needed to be done to help the carrier survive. The problem was the carrier wasn't interested in our survival. They had already eliminated over 4,000 jobs. We had 10,000 to begin with. And with each progressive event, whether it was the Iraq War, 9/11, SARS, bird flu, you name it, they used it as an excuse to break the contract.
Sounds like George Bush, the president. I mean, everything is part of a plan to make use of it. You know, that's
every opportunity that presented itself, Northwest was very quick to manipulate it, to take advantage of it. And ultimately, the reason why we struck was because Northwest Airlines insisted that we permanently agreed to the elimination of 53% of our jobs. And those jobs were people that I had worked with for 15, 20 years. These are like family. Your coworkers, when you spend so much time working together, side by side, working airplanes, we had cleaners, we had plant maintenance, welders, the full gamut of what it takes to do aircraft maintenance.
It's a collective process, isn't it?
It is. And the company wanted to eliminate the majority of those people. And it was something that they knew we couldn't accept it. They knew we would fight them. They spent well over $100 million preparing for the strike. They were preparing for the strike even before we began negotiations. And so this was all planned. They were going to break our union. And while they did win the strike, they certainly didn't break the union. That's obvious. We're sitting here talking to you today. AMFA is still on the property at Northwest Airlines, representing the honorable men and women who have returned after the strike, and we fully intend to be there from now and every day going forward until we rebuild the union on the property at Northwest.
Well, it seems as far as the workers in the airline industry, it's been one attack after another on them, from ESOP, from bankruptcy, I mean the crisis. I mean, it seems like they've bared the brunt of this economic crisis in the industry. And you have Eastern Airlines. I mean, workers go from airline to airline as a result of what's going on. I mean, it's a real fiasco, I mean, for airline workers. And, how has this affected the morale of airline workers?
Well, Steve, I'm glad you asked that, because it's taken on almost a nomadic type. It was taking on a nomadic type existence, where our mechanics were going from carrier to carrier, seeking employment.
And these are skilled,
and these are skilled professional people that have to go to school, learn this craft, take a test, an FAA test, you know what I mean, to say, well, you rate an airframe, and now you rate a power plant license, and now you have an A and a P license. And now you can go to a carrier, but that's just your license to go learn now about your carrier and learn to go fix these sophisticated $150 million aircraft. You know what I'm saying? Some people are under the impression that a black box is black, and it's not, it's orange. You see what I'm saying? These are little intricacies that you think, well, the carriers themselves say, well, he has a license or she has a license. Put them to work, and it's not that simple. And,
you're talking about very complicated and complex equipment.
Very sophisticated equipment.
That you need to have people who are extremely knowledgeable and aware of that kind of equipment and how it operates and that kind of thing. It sounds like a highly developed workforce are required. They have to be focused on getting that equipment working.
Well, it absolutely does, and that is part of the the problem within the industry today is that traditionally you had aircraft mechanics and aviation mechanics that worked for the carriers. They were unionized. They didn't have to worry about losing their job, an employer coming and intimidating them, browbeating them into not doing proper maintenance. As a unionized mechanic, I never had to balance, am I going to get in trouble for bringing this defect to the attention of my employer and fixing it? Non-union carriers today, I've spoken to our guys that have left the industry or left the carriers and gone to the non-union shops. Every single day they have to balance their own personal well-being, their own financial situation, their ability to feed their family based on, if I find this defect or if I write this up and I turn it in and make it a permanent part of the record where it has to be fixed, I may be putting my own personal well-being on the line. It's a safety issue that most people don't know about, they don't think about it, but you certainly don't want your aircraft mechanic, you don't want your doctor, you don't want anyone balancing purely the economic consequences to them personally based on whether or not they should do the right thing.
Are you saying that there's retaliation against mechanics, and if they say that this plane is unsafe and needs to be repaired, they're worried of that?
Absolutely, because that even happened at unionized shops. And that's really the value of having a union to back you up. We had a mechanic at Northwest Airlines that Northwest had fired for following the maintenance procedures. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but if you want to see the arbitration case, I'd be happy to show it to you. Even the FAA was complicit in trying to help Northwest not follow the maintenance manual, because let's face it, when a manufacturer produces an airplane, they're very conservative, and all of these things that they want you to do is in the idea of them not getting sued. And so a lot of this stuff is viewed by the carrier and perhaps even as a mechanic that this might be a little overkill. But the fact is that's what the practices are. That's what I'm signing off. When I sign off a procedure, I'm saying that I did exactly what the maintenance manual said. Well, at a non-union shop, the carriers don't care whether or not it's actually being done properly. And I know that sounds callous and unreal. I'm telling you, it happens. I've watched it over my career, where you have managers that deliberately tell you, don't worry about that. I know the manual says that, but we're not going to do it. And so you hand them the paperwork and you say, all right, you're a licensed mechanic, you sign it. I've never had one sign it yet that I challenged. They hand it back to us, we go do it right. At a union shop, you have those protections. At a non-union shop, they can fire you tomorrow because you're doing too good of a job. And I assure you, the carriers don't want you doing too good of a job.
You mean if you're doing your job and if you're professional, you're in trouble?
You absolutely are going to be in trouble.
So that lowers really the standards of the industry and puts everybody in jeopardy if you have that kind of situation.
Absolutely, Steve.
Yes.
One thing that I want to add on to what Steve is saying, and I used this analogy in the past, we're all working people here, and you go out and you work hard, and let's say you was fortunate enough to earn a good wage, and you bought yourself a brand new Mercedes-Benz. Would you take that brand new Mercedes-Benz down to your local gas station and ask him to fix your car?
Well, that's a good question. Well, let's go on now to this fight over representation, how it came about and what it means for airline mechanics. Steve?
Well, actually, I think that's a good question, and there's an entry point to that most people, I don't believe, really understand. Because of these mergers that are taking place, and it's big in conversation in the media today about these mergers. A lot of unions, all unions, are concerned about losing their membership due to a merger. If you merge with Delta Airlines, for example, in our craft, they're non-union, and we could lose our representation simply by that merger. I believe what happened with the Teamsters is there was the U.S. Air America West merger. The Teamsters represented the America West mechanics and related, and actually lost them to the representation, or because of the merger, they lost representation rights. Having just experienced that, they looked at the rest of the landscape and said, we're vulnerable at other places too, particularly United. And so they began to collect representation cards at United Airlines, hoping that if there was a merger between Continental and United, there would be an election so that at least they'd have a fighting chance. I believe that they got a better response than they expected, because like you mentioned earlier, Steve, all airline workers are beat up. They've had defeat after defeat, disappointment, promises made that were broken, pensions lost, all of these things. Well, when the Teamsters come and say, hey, we're the white knight, we can fix your problems, we're Mr. Clean, we know how to fix all these problems for you. Our guys like to hear that because everybody wants to have the white knight ride into town and slay the dragon. The only problem is, you know, and the Teamsters are a labor organization that has a history, that has been out there. You know, obviously all unions I support. I think it's important that all working men and all union men and women support each other. But we have a track record, the Teamsters have a track record, and I believe once our guys realize that the Teamsters really don't have you know, a magic bullet, or they don't have the white knight that's going to come and slay the United Dragon, I think they're going to begin to realize that there's a lot of political rhetoric that's been thrown out there, a lot of campaigning, and that the fact is that the Teamsters can't do any better at their carriers. Look at Continental, look at...
Well, Kurt, why don't you talk about the airlines where Teamsters do represent mechanics? I mean, what's happened at these airlines?
Okay, currently right now the biggest carrier that they represent is Continental Airlines. And just recently they have come to us and they have asked us to possibly represent them also. So we're kind of in a crisscross situation right here. Besides that, they also work for Frontier, which is a smaller regional airline. And then you've also got, at one point, interesting enough, they represented our Southwest airline mechanics for a period of time. And during that time, there was some outsourcing issues that had come up, so that they had allowed some outsourcing within the United States here. And so anyways, in 2003, the mechanics there, the problem with the Teamsters was they were not focused on our issues, on the mechanics issues. It was kind of a homogenous pod and everybody. So what happened within 3 weeks, Steve, and usually these things take a year, or the Teamsters right now, it's taken them 2 years to do this card drive. These guys in 3 weeks got all their cards signed and started the process, and they overthrew the Teamsters at Southwest Airlines.
So they joined AMFA.
Yes.
Now, why would the workers decide that they're going to leave a major union, and the Teamsters is one of the largest unions in the country, and join a smaller union like AMFA? Why would they make that decision?
Precisely because of our focus.
Yeah, and it's
Doug?
simple to me. The Teamsters, they preach democracy. They say that they have all this. However, they've got a lot of issues with that. In fact, they have the government overseeing them because they weren't giving people free elections. They weren't addressing the people's issues as they said that they would.
Well, how is your union, say, structurally different than the Teamsters?
Well, our
Steve?
union is bottom up.
What does that mean?
It comes the membership, the locals.
Well, what does that mean? Because they would say they're bottom up too. Steve?
There are some real significant differences. Let's talk about bottom up. Let's start at the top and work down. I'm the national director of AMFA. I'm the highest elected officer in our union. Our members, if they chose to remove me from office, they decided that I wasn't representing their best interest, I was doing a lousy job. All they would have to do is get 3 of our locals together to sign a petition to begin the recall. That vote would now go out to the full membership, and they would vote on whether or not to retain me as the national director.
So you're subject to recall by the membership in the middle of your term?
Absolutely. And the Teamsters, you cannot touch Jimmy Hoffa. You cannot, and it doesn't matter whether it was Jimmy Hoffa or anybody else.
Well, the regional director of the Teamsters, the transportation department, or the airline division of the Teamsters, is he elected, he or she elected?
I believe that they're elected. They're also can be appointed.
By the rank and file?
I don't believe that they are. They're appointed by, by the executive boards. But I'll be honest with you, I don't know a lot about the Teamsters' internal structure. The things that I do know about AMFA, I know are unique in the industry. It doesn't matter which union you're talking about in aviation. There are some other things that are very unique about our organization. For example, our dues structure. Most of our dues go to the locals. Now the Teamsters have made the claim that AMFA is broke and the National doesn't have that much money. We have plenty of money, but the difference is our members are at the local, and that's where their money needs to be working for them. And so if you look at our LM2 sheets and LM3s, you're going to find out that the locals are very well positioned. Their finances are in great shape. They've got most of the money, and we're structured that way. Another example that's very unique within our organization is that our wages are structured and linked directly to our members' well-being. If they get a raise, national officers get a raise. If our members take a concession, if they take a pay cut, our wages not immediately, but within the next pay cycle, within a couple of months, our wages are adjusted downward. There is no other union that I know of on the planet that would take a pay cut. Their officers would take a pay cut because their members had to take a pay cut.
That's a radical difference from most unions in this country.
It is, and AMFA is very unique in those, in a lot of situations, and I could go on, but we're limited in time.
Well, the transparency that you're talking about, it seems like you don't have that transparency in other unions. Is that a reason people should stay with your union, for example?
It's a major reason, but this really goes to the heart of unionism today, why we're experiencing the problem we are, is that in order to have those things benefit you as a union member, you have to participate. If you're going to sit on the sidelines, if you're going to be a spectator to your own union advocacy, it doesn't matter who represents you, really. Because if you're not going to take the advantage of being able to hold your officers accountable, if you're not going to go to your negotiations, actually be able to observe the company
and you have that right to go to your negotiations?
Absolutely. At Northwest Airlines in 2001, when we negotiated our first contract, we had 25 seats available at every negotiation, not just some of them.
I don't think the
everyone.
employers like that, do they?
The employers didn't like it at all, but here's another thing that people need to understand. We had just won the representational election at Northwest between the IAM and AMFA, and we had won very soundly. Northwest had their executive labor officers at the count, and they were counting. They wanted to see how much interest there was in the union vote. When they saw that 96% of our members had voted for a union, they knew they were in trouble. And that's why they allowed our members to sit at the table, to sit in the room and to be able to observe. One of the first things Northwest tried to do was take away our closed shop, our union security. They said, well, we're going to acknowledge all the rest of the contract, but we're not going to acknowledge that piece of it. What we told them was, that's going to be a big mistake, because our members are not going to appreciate the very first thing that you do is to attack their union. You just saw what happened in the organization and the representation election. They said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll think about it. 2 hours later, they called us back and said, we've changed our mind. We're going to recognize the union security. That's the power that workers have, but they have to get involved in their own unions. They have to get involved in their advocacy. And if you think a union, changing unions, and bringing in a new set of officers and new rules is going to make any difference, it may make a little difference, and in some cases it will be worse. The only real difference is that American workers have to stand up for themselves, they have to get into the fight, and they have to push back against the government and the corporations who have had their way with us for decades.
Now, one of the issues that has been raised about this election and the way other elections are conducted in the airline industry is that you have to have a majority vote for the union, and there's been a large layoff of employees, of mechanics. Is there a danger that if not enough people participate, you could actually have no union at United Airlines?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes, you need, in the election that we have right now, you need 50% of the people that are eligible to vote. And our furloughed members that have been furloughed for over 5 years, in fact, I can go 8 years to 9/11, back down to 9/11. Those people are allowed to vote, and a lot of them have moved on, but they're still under this system allowed to vote. So we have roughly 4,000 people laid off. We have about 5,400 that are currently active, which means we need 88% to vote that are active. The last representational election we had, and we had very few laid off at the time, we only got 64%.
So there's a danger.
Very serious danger.
It's clear it should be clear that if the way this NMB election is set up is if those people that are furloughed don't vote, the government considers that to be a vote for no union.
Right.
Even though they've been laid off 5, 6, 7, 8 years, that's a no union vote.
So
even though they really haven't been in the industry for a long, long time.
Right.
Have there been any efforts to change that rule as far as who can vote in an election? Because 8 years seems like a long time to have a worker vote on representation when they've been out of the industry that long, or that's the way they want it probably.
Well, they do want it. It's not so much that we're not interested in taking away a person's right who has recall rights to take away their right to vote. The problem is the way that the NMB handles that vote. If you don't vote, they count that as a no vote for the union. It's preloaded to be anti-union. If we use those same rules to elect a president, we would never have another president in this country again, because those people who don't vote would be voted as if they're not voting for any of the candidates, and so the majority would have voted not to have a new president.
So it's an anti-labor discriminatory
Absolutely.
Procedure. Now, one of the issues, another issue that's come up is the Teamsters apparently, and they're not here, they were invited, but maybe we can have them in a future program, have promised that if the members vote or the mechanics vote to join the Teamsters, they will be able to join the Teamsters pension plan. And maybe you can talk about that whole issue of the pension and the issue of what will happen if they do join the Teamsters.
Well, the first thing to understand is that in order to join the pension plan, United Airlines has to agree to it. And, you know, United Airlines is trying to get rid of any liability they have on their balance
So they don't
sheet.
want a defined pension plan, which is the Teamster pension plan right now.
Well, it's a multi-employer plan. They just got rid of all their people's pensions. I don't know why they would want to step into another pension in which they were going to take on additional liability. Now, the Teamsters have made it out to the people on the floor that, hey, we come in, Jimmy Hoffa is going to show up with his baseball bat, beat United up, and you're going to get this pension. The reality is that, like I said, United has to agree to it, and they're going to they could take on a significant liability. In fact, UPS just paid $3.6 billion, not million, $3.6 billion to get out of a Teamster pension plan. So there's many reasons why United wouldn't want to join the pension plan. And to be honest with you, I don't know why. I mean, like we've already discussed, I was in an ESOP and I lost all my money.
Yes.
I had a pension that United, I entrusted them with my money, and I
Bankruptcy.
lost all my money. I probably don't want anybody else controlling my
this is
money
like
from
three
this point
strikes.
forward.
Go to the well for the third
Well,
time.
I mean, the whole state of workers in this country, and it's not just airline workers, where they're destroying defined pension plans. They're putting one in 401ks. They tried to privatize Social Security and put it in the stock market. I mean, this is a real issue for working people, that they're going to have any retirement at all. I mean, is this, Steve? I mean, it sounds like, I mean, and particularly at United, your members are under the gun. I mean, you're
They are, and all workers are. There was a time, not all that long ago, that if you were a worker in this country with a defined pension plan, you had confidence, you had faith that it would be paid, because that's what used to be the norm. It's not anymore. If you have a defined pension plan, you have no idea whether or not that's ultimately going to be bankrupt, turned over to the government, and reduced in value.
And these judges, bankruptcy judges, who are they representing? Are they representing the workers?
Well, that's the biggest problem of all. You know that they're just the henchmen for the corporations, and that's why the corporations go into bankruptcy. You know, this is all predetermined. They already know where they're going to file because they have favorable courts. It's just like Delta and Northwest filed on the exact same day. Do you think there's any coincidence they're talking about merging now? This has been really just a complete manipulation of this country's
So these are
laws.
schemes to attack workers and really bust the unions. One last point. There's been some talk of United of outsourcing or contracting out the maintenance space. Where does AMFA stand on that issue?
I can tell you where I stand on it. If United Airlines thinks they're going to continue to send my job away, I'm not interested in it. And you know, the union has a veto power over this process. It's in our contract.
So you'll
And-
be able to vote on it. The
Right.
members would be able to vote
And-
on this?
and-
On a sale.
And
On a
in
sale.
my opinion is that if everybody's job is not protected, we don't have all the contractual rights that we currently have, and get something out of the deal, we're not interested.
We're not interested, yeah, as a member.
So, and it sounds like, why should they? Why should they contract out? You do a good job. You're here taking care of the planes.
Right.
Why should they contract out other than to cut wages,
Cost savings.
cut benefits, cut the conditions of the workers who are working there? Is
Well,
that
also,
the-
when you have a group that is incapable of running their own business correctly, you know what I mean, where they're showing considerable loss, I'm sure that's a consideration. You know, you got to remember, it was made clear to us that they were not looking to put any substantial capital investment back into the base. So, you know, how can you generate these monies? Well, you go ahead and you put us on the chopping block, and you get a you know, outside source to come in and say that they'll commit these funds, you know, to this jet shop or to this base, and you know what I mean, with them keeping a certain percentage stake in that entity. Well, that tells you, well, they're not interested and they're not capable, because if they were, you look back to our bankruptcy, they came to our group and said, we need 96 million bucks. We gave them everything reluctantly, that they needed to make their business plan work. And here they are 2.5, 3 years later, it's not working.
saying they want more. Okay, well, I want to thank you for coming on. I think we had a useful discussion. It's not finished, but we will continue this discussion, and learn more about the issues facing airline mechanics. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you,
Okay,
Steve,
thank
for
you.
the
Thank you,
opportunity.
Steve. Thank you.